to some larger thing in a universe. I mean, look at it. It's like art, a turning ladder made up of tiny, intricate colors. And the fact that no two are the same kind of says a lot. Well, for instance, it means that each person is unique. You know, just because you were born with certain parents does not mean you have to turn up like them. I'm really not anything like my parents at all. Well, maybe my mom, but only because I'm so caring and helpful. I'm really not anything like my dad. Well, I guess maybe that we look alike. My brother had to stay home from school because he's sick. My mom had to take off from work to take care of him. Dad's always at work. You know, I think that's why he's mad all the time. He never gets any time for himself. I just wish he wouldn't yell, you know, and get mad over every little thing. Anyway, I just haven't been getting a lot of sleep lately. And that's really why I've been falling asleep in your class. But I'll try harder. I will, Mr. Siegel, I promise. No, Mr. Siegel, please, I love learning. I do. I love learning that deep inside of me is a code that belongs to me and only me. I mean, kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? Thank you, guys.
Hey, everybody. Give it up for Philly Young Playwrights. Okay, in a minute, we're going to start the fireside chat. Does anybody have matches? Because I need that. Before we do that, though, we have a really exciting announcement from a really exciting partner in the Opportunity Youth work. So I'm just going to ask Sarah Kay from Prudential to come on up and share some good news with us. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks, Steve. As many of you know, so again, my name is Sarah Kay, and I'm with Prudential Financial. As many of you know, Prudential was founded as a social purpose business or social enterprise. Our first product was burial insurance because our founder saw that working families didn't have the financial means to bury their loved ones. With that first product, he created an inclusive market where working families had the same opportunity as everyone else to achieve financial security. Over 140 years later, we still adhere to that same belief. From senior leadership down, there is a deep commitment to corporate social responsibility and to be actively engaged in the most pressing social issues. Prudential's purpose is to make lives better by solving the financial challenges of the changing world. The younger generation is at the forefront of that changing world, living through those challenges and solving them. We know that if a young person has the resources and support they need to succeed, it not only positively impacts that young person, but their families and their communities. As some of you may have heard, on Tuesday, we announced that Prudential is making a $180 million commitment to Opportunity Youth through 2025. Thanks. The $180 million will consist of grants and impact investments that will help prepare the future global workforce, build financially stable communities, and help break the cycle of poverty. This is the largest private sector investment in Opportunity Youth to date. As you all know, there are over 350 million global Opportunity Youth across the world. Many countries, both mature and developing, are struggling with this issue. And that's why about 2 years ago, we approached Steve and Monique to think about potentially expanding this network of work, the best practices, the lessons learned of this national network to a global level. And then Jamie McAuliffe came in and helped launch Aspen's Global Opportunity Youth Initiative, of which Prudential provided the seed investment of $5 million. This work will encompass 3 pathways. First is a place-based strategy to increase employment opportunities in local communities, similar to all the work that you all have done in your local communities, a global network of Opportunity Youth leaders, and a global call to action. This is taking all of the work that you all have done and creating, hopefully, this global exchange and network of ideas and best practices that can be exchanged between all of you all. And we're so excited to invite our first 3 international communities, which is Bogota, Colombia, Mombasa, Kenya, and Pune, India. And we have our colleagues from Colombia here today and have been here for the last several days throughout this convening. So we recognize that businesses like ours have a responsibility and a role in providing tools for young people to access the job market and to get on a path to financial security. Opportunity Youth represent a large untapped talent pool that businesses need to access. These young people will create an inclusive workforce, build financially stable communities, and ultimately boost the economy. At Prudential, we see investing in these young people as a down payment on their futures and the future health and global economy. So we thank you for everyone in this room for your continued partnership and your commitment to transforming people's lives, and we look forward to the ongoing work in the future. So thank you to Aspen, especially for holding you all in this convening and for this quick moment. Thank you.
Well, thank God the mic was attached, or else Sarah could have dropped it. That's an awesome commitment. Thank you, Prudential. Here, I'll go. They told me I have to sit here.
Okay, no worries.
Welcome. Okay, so thanks everybody. Again, I'm Steve Patrick. You're aware of that. You're all suffering from Steve fatigue already. And I have the great privilege of working with the Aspen team and co-leading this work with Monique and Yelena and lots of people. Jamil. It's great to be with you all. So we have a great opportunity here to have a deep conversation with a deep thinker who is in a deeply important role. And you'll notice that Bill Bynum couldn't be with us. Bill has a really important personal matter to attend to, and our hearts go out to him, and we are thinking of him. And we'll make sure that this network gets to connect with his voice and his leadership. He's a really important leader in the work down in Mississippi, in particular in the South. But we do have, and this was our original plan, so it is kind of a bonus to get a little extra time with Lisa Hamilton. Lisa is the brand spanking new, barely been there 4 months, president and CEO of the Annie E. Casey Foundation.
Thank you.
And I want to start with some thank yous. Don't worry, at some point you'll get to speak, I promise.
This is the best fireside chat I've ever had. I don't have to talk.
Right, and these guys agree, because most fireside chats we have are in Aspen, and then it snows and all their flights get canceled. So they're very pleased that this fireside chat will not end with that result. So these are not your typical grant seeker, sycophantic, sucking up thank yous. These are real and heartfelt. So first, I want to thank you for Kids Count. How many of you all use Kids Count for your own work and in your own work?
Thank you. That was one of my first jobs at the foundation. I led Kids Count when I first came to the foundation.
That was serendipitous for me. That's awesome. Thank you. So thank you for Kids Count. That data is so important to making the case for this work. Also, thank you for being the funder that has historically cared the most about vulnerable youth and young adults. That's part of your history, and we really appreciate that. We thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you for Patrice Cromwell. Where is Patrice?
I'm thankful for Patrice Cromwell.
Yeah. Now that you're in charge, you won't even know how much we borrow her from you for helping to guide our leadership council, being one of the earliest investors in making this happen. We granted a heck of a lot of your dollars, and we're deeply appreciative of it. And Patrice has been a really important thought partner, so thank you for her.
Thank you.
And then, I think lastly, this is sort of from the old spiritual songs, but thank you for being you. You are the one we've been waiting for, as the old song goes. And what I mean by that, and we talked a little bit about this before, is you have a history that often gets overlooked in these roles. That is to say, a foundation says, wow, what great work this person's done in multiple roles across multiple institutions that are tied to this one family. And now let's go hire a new person from outside. By the way, it might end up being a white dude from the outside. So what I'd really love you to share first with our network is kind of a little bit about your story. You guys can look it up in the bio, but lots of time with the company, lots of time in corporate philanthropy. How many, 8 years at Annie E? 9? 8 years at Annie E. Casey, working up the ranks. And so I think it's important for people, we're storytellers in this network. Would you mind just sort of kicking off by sharing who you are and a little bit about your...
Thank you. It is such a pleasure to be with you, and more importantly, to be with all of the members of your network. Through Patrice, I often get to hear what you're doing and to be excited about your work, and so to be able to be with you in person is just a great joy for me. So thank you for all that you and your network are doing. My thank you to you. You know, I often meet people and they have Googled me and they assume they know my story, and so I'm thankful for the opportunity to say something about me that's not, you know, what people just normally read, you know, a progression of jobs, which is very different than how I lived it. I lived that resume. I didn't, you know, it didn't just sort of happen magically. But I, you know, began my career believing I wanted to be a corporate lawyer, and, you know, worked really hard to begin my career at a private law firm that focused on tax law, not at all where I necessarily thought I'd end up, but it was me and 11 white men at my very first job. And so you can only imagine how lonely and isolating that experience might have been. And I quickly realized I didn't really like practicing law in a law firm, and I thought maybe I'll just go in-house to a company and it'll feel totally different. And UPS is headquartered in Atlanta, where I was, and got an opportunity to go in-house with UPS. And not long after I got there, realized, no, it really wasn't the situation, it was the work, that I had chosen to go into a career that just didn't feed my soul. I was competent at it, I had the skills to do it, but no one ever told me I ought to pursue something I cared about. And I realized there was a corporate foundation at UPS, and so I spent the next years both trying to do a good job in the job I had. I think that's the thing people often forget, is even when you want to do something different, you better do a good job at the job you have, or else you'll never get another opportunity. So I tried to do a really good job in the job I had, while also trying to position myself for work in the foundation. And ultimately, after 6 long years of waiting, got the opportunity to work at the foundation. I jokingly say a tax lawyer with a personality is a commodity too precious to leave on the shelf. And so the company said, that's lovely that you want to work in philanthropy, but we want you to go be a lobbyist in Washington. So I left the foundation. I was a lobbyist for a couple years and got to come back to my dream job, which was the head of the foundation. They had bigger plans for me and asked me to lead public relations for the company after that. And that was, again, one of those situations where I had great opportunities, but it wasn't what fed my soul. And I ran PR, and it was a crisis a day and wasn't changing people's lives the way I felt I wanted to. And so I had become a board member of the Casey Foundation. Many people may not know the Casey Foundation is the founder of UPS's private philanthropy, and so the majority of the board are UPS executives. So I had become a Casey Foundation board member, and my predecessor invited me to dinner, and I thought he wanted to talk about how he was doing in his new job, and he was inviting me to come work at Casey. And it was that moment of clarity, like, yes, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm not supposed to be running PR at this company. And so I left in 2011 and have been on the most wondrous, amazing journey ever since at Casey.
That's a great story, and yeah. And it's also an important story of stick-to-itiveness and resilience, because you weren't happy for a decade in that job.
Yeah.
You know, it's commendable, and it's also an important thing that all of us, especially those of us who work directly with young people, especially young people in the room, understanding that it's a marathon.
It can take time.
Yeah,
it can take time. Patience is a virtue.
Well, great. Let's talk about the foundation. I'm glad you mentioned Googling you, because I mentioned I Googled you, and the other famous Lisa Hamilton is actually a gambler, a blackjack player, or a poker player. All right.
And the people at the foundation can tell you I have no poker face, so.
Yeah, I was thinking, this is why I could probably never run a large philanthropy, that what if the two Lisa Hamiltons got together, you gave her a couple of $100 million off the endowment, you could grow.
I could grow the endowment really quickly, couldn't I?
I'm not sure that that's good for job security.
It's not.
No.
It's not.
If Lisa Hamilton's watching on the live stream, forget about it, the other Lisa Hamilton. Okay, so back to the conversation. So the foundation, you know, there are so many things you've done historically. You know, we look to the place-based work that you've done over the years, and actually we're a model for saying like, hey, let's report on what we learned, what worked, what didn't. We do a lot of thinking about that. We've shared those Casey lessons. Obviously, you're super well known for child welfare, the Jim Casey program. We've been in cahoots around that. You've done the data, the Kids Count work, that's important. Justice reform, and I don't know if folks know about JDAI, which has been around a while.
30 plus years.
And so there's a lot to talk about, workforce, 2Gen now more recently. Tell us about sort of what is the ethos of what Casey is doing.
Sure.
What's your, how do you talk about your history? And then let's pivot to the future, because that's exciting.
You know, I think it's built around Jim Casey's story, our founder's story. He has really had an amazing history. He grew up the child of a single mother. His father died when he was 11 years old, and he left school in the 3rd grade to become a bicycle messenger boy in order to make money for his family. You know, as he became more successful, thought back about what his own story had taught him, and even some of the challenges he saw with young people who worked at UPS. And he just had a fundamental belief that family was really important. And that's at the core of what our child welfare and juvenile justice work is about. That those are the two systems that most often tear young people out of their families. And we know that for young people to be successful, they need the love and support and encouragement of family. And so that's really the sort of common genesis of our child welfare and juvenile justice work, is that how do we help families that might be in crisis stay together, because we know that's going to be so important to young people's success long term. And then we know that those families that they're growing up in have to be economically stable. The stresses and challenges of poverty, you know, really can be disastrously harmful to young people's development. And so, you know, sort of how do you keep them in a family, and then how do you make those families or provide opportunity for those families so that parents can take care of their kids? And so that's what led us into a lot of the workforce work and benefits access work and savings, because you want families to be financially stable so they can plan for the future and have what they need today. And then we know that those families are growing up in communities that aren't always well equipped to give them those opportunities. And so that's sort of the third concentric circle out from that child, is the place where they're growing up. And so that's what led us to all of the place-based work and neighborhood transformation. You know, we are often thought of as one of the leading children's foundations in the country, and that's something we're really proud of. And folks often wonder why we don't have an education strand or an education focus. But we know that, you know, whether you're growing up in a family and whether your family can take care of you, and the place that you're growing up has everything to do with the opportunity that young people are going to have. So there are lots of other institutions that focus on education or you know, health or other aspects of young people's lives, but there aren't a whole lot that care about the kinds of issues that the most vulnerable young people are facing. And so I'm really proud that we have historically done that work and are planning to continue to do that kind of work.
Yeah, that's great. And it really resonates as a through line of this convening, where we started with a plenary yesterday morning, although it feels like 3 months ago in some instances. So much learning, and where we really heard about massive systems reform in the justice system here. Far fewer kids being locked up, far fewer being put into the adult system. Lots of diversion, lots of things that are near and dear to Annie Casey's heart. But you know, what the Philly DA sort of said was, hello, poverty, you know, that if you got to go further upstream, and you have to think about whole systems, which it sounds like you.
Which is how Casey operates. You know, Casey isn't trying to program its way out of these challenges. We know that what young people need is more than just, you know, a particular intervention. That's not the solution. That young people have the challenges they have because of things we as adults do. That we've put together, you know, structures and systems that hold young people back, and we can't help them go forward if we don't dismantle these systems that are designed to set young people on a disastrous path. And so Casey's always had this perspective that it's not just about programs. The right interventions are important, and too often in this country we invest in programs that aren't proven to work, so we do have to get the right programs. But that doesn't make any difference if they're not delivered in the context of systems that are designed to help young people go forward and not hold them back. And that, so I think of sort of programs, and then there's policy. How does, policy help us get to the right place? But then I think the third piece that folks don't always talk about is power. That if you don't have systems that are accountable to the people they're supposed to serve, then we're not going to have a sustainable ecosystem for young people. So that's sort of how we think about our work, far beyond just programs.
I hear a whole lot of dittos, a whole lot of us twos in the audience. So I want to go two places, but first let's talk about power. That's something we talk a lot about. How do you engage young people as part of the solution and in the conversation at the foundation? Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. We have for a long time engaged young people more often in specific parts of our work. I'd say it really started with our child welfare work. We have an initiative called the Jim Casey Initiative, which works with young people who are aging out of the foster care system. And early on in the beginning of that initiative, 10, 15 years ago, we recognized we really need to listen to the young people to make sure we're solving the challenges they want us to solve, and developed an approach that we call youth-adult partnership that doesn't look at young people as just a focus group. It doesn't, look at young people in a separate sort of way, but thinks of them as problem solvers and partners and drivers of the work. And I certainly think that through the years we've done more to embed that approach to the work across all of our different bodies of work. Many of them have youth councils, youth policy groups that are sort of a standing group and partner with our work. And then when we have specific initiatives, they typically have young people who are advisors and sort of integrated into that work. So I can tell you we are better than we used to be, but not as good as I hope we'll be one day, because every day we see that when we really listen to young people, they tell us the big sort of thing we've often missed, and they have voices far more powerful than ours in communities and with policymakers. So I think that's one of the best parts of your work, is the way that you empower and engage young people, and it's part of what I hope to do more of in my leadership at the foundation.
All right, there are some young people who can help you with that here. I'm sure they'll want to talk to you after this session.
People will tell you when I go to meetings, I don't necessarily want to talk to the adults. I'm like, where are the young people? I want to talk to the young people, because they're what gives me energy and hope and optimism. When you see how smart young people are. I'm the mom of a 16-year-old, so I'm sort of in the thick of young people energy. But the things they think about, the way they're knowledgeable about the world, the ideas they have, and I'm always impressed with their dedication to changing the world. I meet young people all the time who face unimaginable barriers, but the one thing they all have in common is that they're always thinking about how they can make things better for the young people who can come behind them. And I just think that's such a beautiful energy that we have to support and empower if we're going to get the kind of change we want to have.
Fantastic. I don't have to ask you what inspires you now. I'll just cross that off the list. I'm glad you mentioned, how many of you know some of the young people who've been involved in the Jim Casey work? Because I think there's some Venn overlap with this crowd. And,
wonderful.
And we had Sandra address our network. She rocked a panel that included some young people. We also had your predecessor, Patrick, speak to this group, and he did a real call to action. So this is a pivot to the future and what you're thinking about at Annie E. Casey. He sort of challenged this group to close youth jails, right? Youth prisons. That work continues. I'd love to understand how the foundation's, supporting that. We all, this room completely agrees that we should stop locking up children. That's kind of a no-brainer. But maybe take that question about where that work is, and then tell us where you're going to take, what's your charge to us? How should we be thinking about the future, and how are you thinking about the future of the foundation?
Yeah, I think Patrick's call to action around closing youth prisons is extraordinarily powerful. Because I think it speaks to something we've got to make sure all systems do, and that's not hurt children. And there are probably few systems that hurt children's futures as much as the justice system does. And so I think we continue to work on trying to close youth prisons, but that's not the end of the story.
Yeah.
And part of closing them means you've got to create opportunity for them. And so I think the close is important, but then what is it that we build instead of that? And it's not about facilities, and it's actually not even about the justice system. It's about the work that you're doing. What is it that we create instead of that? And with all of the money that was deployed into that harmful process, that creates pathways to opportunity for young people. And that is what I'm excited about, how we combine that commitment to ensuring systems don't hurt young people with a commitment to ensuring we create systems of opportunity for young people. So that work absolutely continues, but I think there are more ways that we can pull together work across the foundation, because making sure kids are in families and not in those institutions needs to be partnered with opportunity for them, employment and educational pathways, and that can only happen in the places where they're growing up.
Yeah.
And so I think there are opportunities to pull all three strands of our work together to benefit the very young people that we are talking about today.
That's exciting. So you're doing a little silo busting.
A little silo busting, yeah. Casey, like Aspen and many other
Right.
places, we've lived in very deep silos for a long time, but folks around Casey have heard me say a long time that you can't fix the child welfare system and not think about economic opportunity. The majority of young people are in those systems for neglect, not for abuse, and so that means their parents are unable to properly care for them, which is about resources. And so we can't just sort of in a vacuum imagine we can address that system without thinking about the broader circumstances their families are faced with. So I don't think it's a nice to do, I think it's a must do. We can't deal with juvenile justice without thinking about communities and the places young people are growing up. So I'm trying to help us see that it's not just because I want people to get along and I want people to talk to one another, but because it's fundamental. We can't solve issues without these sort of cross-system, cross-sector solutions.
Fantastic. We love that. Famously, Aspen is probably the concrete around our silos, maybe many
More
feet
durable
thicker than, but we are doing similar work. So we're excited that you're going to have a conversation with our CEO. We're going to make that happen about silo busting. And I think there's a navigation there, I presume. And so it'd be interesting to hear, about, we all know it's lonely at the top as a CEO. How do you think about the role of a foundation leader? How do you think about this role you've stepped into? You've actually had the privilege, I heard you call it a privilege earlier, of watching your predecessor. So you've been able to kind of study it from the inside, but are there some lessons about leading that you might offer us or to think about?
Mostly get out of the way. My biggest job is to get out of the way. I am an enabling mechanism. My job is to create a place and structures that allow the people who work at Casey and the partners we work with to do their best. And so I work very hard to stay out of the way. What could be challenging you in doing your work, and how can I get it out of your way? I'll tell you a funny story. When I first came to Casey, we had a budget process that lasted a good 6 months. Like literally from June to December was the budget season for us, and I thought that was utterly insane.
Yeah.
Why in the world would we burden our staff with doing the budget for 1 year, 6 months? Like before you could barely start doing your work, you were already to the process of figuring out your next year's budget. So I have spent many years dismantling our budget system that involved many, many layers. And I think the first budget write-ups I read were about 1,800 pages. Yeah, really, 1,800 pages that our staff had spent writing. So I have, in ways that don't prevent us from creating a budget, tried to tear down all of the bureaucracy that had been built around that. I often say no child will be saved in the making of this budget. So we are not going to spend all our time making a budget for ourselves and doing a dog and pony show for ourselves. We need to be about the business of helping children, and that's not going to happen with 1,300 pages of writing. So I think the staff appreciates my point of view on that.
Patrice has a big smile.
Yeah.
She's like, yeah. By the way, she only did like 4 of those pages. She was with us.
Poor
out in the
Patrice.
field.
I don't know how long she's been at the foundation, but I'm sure she's written thousands of pages of budget write-ups. But that's what I, as a leader, have the power to do, to say this is a waste of time. This is not helping us do our work better, so let's stop. And so I can do things like that. So that's what I think about my role of helping us know what doesn't help, but focusing us on things that do, like collaborating more, listening to young people more. I can set a tone that others will, I can set priorities, like a regional focus. At Casey, when I'm from Georgia, if my southern accent doesn't give me away. And when I came to Casey, I only saw us picking places that were in Providence, Rhode Island, Maine. No disrespect to those places, but children are struggling in Mississippi and in Georgia and in Texas and New Mexico, and it troubled me that as an institution, we did Kids Count and did a heat map that showed us year after year for 25 years that young people were struggling in the South. Yet when we made choices in the Northeast in places that seemed easier. I think we ought to be about the work of doing hard things. And so I called us on our avoidance of the South. And so I have pushed us to work in the South and the Southwest where young people need us. So that's what I can do, is to be a mirror to what we're doing. I can be challenger to the status quo and get us to stop things that we don't need to do. And I can also create mechanisms for us to do important things we need to do, like collaborate.
Beautiful. Wow. Yeah, give it up. Okay, speaking of listening more to young leaders, we're going to add some folks from the audience to this conversation, and I think I'll start with James Fields. Where's James? Right there. And this is part of the way we do things here. Is nothing about us without us is the mantra of the next generation. These are some seasoned young adult leaders who they're a part of our conversation. And so we've invited a couple of folks, and then we'll open it up to the broader audience to kind of contribute what they want to, ask a question if they want to, reflect on this. So I'm going to kick it over to James Fields and ask him to introduce himself and contribute to this discussion, please.
I'm James Fields from the west side of Chicago. Thank you for being here, and thank you for setting the tone in the room. What really resonated with me is the work has to feed our soul. A lot of times with me just I work for an organization in Chicago called Make for Challenge, and I work directly with young people that are involved in the juvenile justice system. And what I notice is that they don't have a seat at the table. And they should have a seat at the table because this system is impacting them. And we're actually in the process of thinking about how do young people have a seat at the table and redesign what juvenile justice should look like. So we're all on the bandwagon of, just pretty much just breaking down the juvenile justice system and ending juvenile detention. My young people actually today at 5 o'clock is going to redesign what we feel Cook County should do in regards to juvenile justice.
Awesome.
So just wanted to just kind of share that. I agree, and what resonated with me is that we do need to understand that this work feeds our soul, but we also need to plant seeds, and we need to plant seeds at home within the community, with their parents, and then think about all the trauma that they experienced and unpack that with them, because in order for us to really have a significant impact on them, and I read your bio also, and change their trajectory, we must feed their soul and plant those seeds. So just, I want to thank you for that.
Thank you very much. I know Casey's done work in Cook County and been a partner with you all trying to change that system, but we have seen around the country really amazing things that can happen when you get young people involved. We've done a lot of work with Virginia most recently on closing youth facilities, and to see them create a student government association with young people that gives them leadership opportunities and a voice in the work that they're doing. I think it's going to be transformative for your system. So I'm so excited to hear that.
Thank you. And I have a question. How can I set the tone in my leadership journey, sort of like how you just set the tone in the room for all of us. Like, how can I set that tone with young people that are experiencing a lot of traumatic events every single day in Chicago as they travel just to get to the program? Like, how do I do that as a leader on my leadership journey?
I think the most important thing you can do is tell the truth. I think so often leaders may buy into a need to sugarcoat something or to not state something that's obvious, like the fact that racial equity issues are at the core of what's going on and people don't want to talk about that elephant in the room. I think if you set a tone of honesty and authenticity with young people, that creates the space for them to tell their truth and for them to be heard. So that's what I try to bring into every room, is the truth and myself. And so I'd invite you to think about doing the same thing in your leadership.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Fantastic. Always nice when a national leader speaks to truth-telling.
I told you I don't have a poker face, so.
Well, in these interesting times, sometimes there are other conversations at the very national level that are not so truthful. So thank you for pushing on that. Do you mind just taking a minute to talk about the JDAI work, just to sum it up for the audience? Because I think there's a leverage point there for our communities, and since justice came up again.
Sure, the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative is work that we've been doing for more than 30 years, and it's now in 300 jurisdictions across the country. That's about keeping young people out of the front end of the system. When a young person is arrested, if they are deemed not safe, or if it is unsafe for them to go back home, they are placed in detention. Imagine it's sort of the youth version of jail. And even one night in a place like that is harmful to a young person, and very often they stay longer than one night. And so as Casey entered juvenile justice work, we decided to start at the beginning. And that initiative has been all about how to help decision makers make very different choices about who needs to be detained and why. And so through that work and the work of lots of other folks, detention levels have been reduced by more than half over the last 25 years, something we're really proud of. What we're not proud of is that as a country, the other half is still there. Yeah. And they are largely Black and brown young people. And so there's still a tremendous amount of work that we need to do, both to address why we detain young people unnecessarily, and more importantly, to address the racial equity issues of who is still being detained. So work that continues, and that I think is very relevant to the work that we're doing to create opportunity for young people.
Fantastic. Thank you for summarizing
You're
that.
welcome.
We can create links to the JDI stuff for the network, et cetera.
Absolutely.
All right, let's hear from Adam Strong. Adam, you want to just introduce yourself to everybody and offer up?
I've been looking at Adam's smiling face through this whole panel, so I'm excited to hear
I've
from
been
you.
smiling the entire time during this panel. Hey, everybody, name's Adam Strong. As you can tell from my accent, I'm from a small rural community, right? And I absolutely love this panel. It's fabulous. I'm glad the mic happens to be in my hand right now. Obviously, pretty excited. But I guess first and foremost, I just want to appreciate the Annie Casey Foundation for supporting the National Council of Young Leaders and Opportunity Youth United. So I just want to say that first and foremost. But I've been bubbling up this entire time over pretty much everything you've been mentioning. But I mean, I really loved when you started talking about the regional focus, right? Because I believe that is so important, because there's so many rural communities out there that, quite frankly, the infrastructure isn't there in terms of economic development, and all we can do is throw life vests, right? But there are so many opportunities potentially right around the bend, right? So that regional focus I thought was so important, and I would just love to be in fellowship and partner with you guys, especially within OYU. I know you focused really in terms of those youth and adult partnerships. And I thought I heard something a little bit about wanting to grow and things of that nature. So we would love to be in fellowship with you guys just within that.
What state are you from, Adam?
I'm from Kentucky.
Kentucky. Okay.
Yeah. I'm from a small rural town in Jackson, Kentucky, town of 2,000, very small. But I appreciate your work, and that's one thing that I really love. But I guess question, especially since your passion for the regional work, right, is what I guess words of encouragement could you say for this larger community, right? In terms of our communities as we're striving forward, what are some of those opportunities or leverage points right across the bend, right? The community next door, right? So I guess, do you have any ideas or support for that? To encourage people here just to think about those opportunities maybe right next door, right, in the community around the bend for their young people. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. You really have given me energy this whole panel. I have just been looking at your beautiful face the whole time. So thank you so much for saying something and for representing the South in here. I appreciate that. I do think we are realizing there are regional solutions to challenges. Often we think in a very small sort of way, what does a particular city hold or a county hold? But economies are very often regional. And so I think you're smart in saying, how do we partner with neighboring communities, adjacent communities to think about solutions? Because what assets one community might not have, one nearby might have as well. And so rather than building an infrastructure just for one small place, we could be better served and better utilize our resources if we think about how we partner not just with each other, but with adjacent communities. So I think you're very smart at thinking about sort of regional approach to how you problem solve, because I do think in smaller communities, you don't have the same sort of infrastructure that you have in other places. But the one thing I will say that I often think is misunderstood about the South is that there is a lot of capacity. It just doesn't look like the capacity we're used to seeing in other places. We're looking for formal institutions. We're looking for 501c3s. We are looking for places with their name on the door. You have to understand the history in these places to understand that people were trying to survive in very oppressive circumstances, and so they didn't always want to put their infrastructure out in ways that it could be attacked or dismantled. So, as we have traveled around the South and have been trying to build our muscle, we've learned that there's actually a lot of capacity and a lot of amazing leadership in regions across the South. We just, as funders and as partners, have to be willing to accept that it looks different than we expect it to look at, that same way it looks in other places, and that we ought to be creative in the ways we fund it differently. And so that's a challenge to us. That's not necessarily a challenge to the region. But I do believe we aren't going to learn how to do that unless we go there. And so there's a lot to learn about how to adapt strategies for rural and southern communities and to partner in more effective ways rather than sort of coming in and assuming we know everything and expecting to plot down some solution that worked in, Connecticut and Kentucky. It doesn't really work like that. So thank you for bringing your perspective to this conversation, because it's only with your voice and insights that we can do that kind of tailoring.
Yeah, I'm going to not shamelessly self-promote about our expanding work in the Deep South too, but I'll just tease you with that and we can talk about it later.
Okay.
Why don't we open it up now for questions from the audience? I know a lot of folks are on information overload. It's been fascinating. I have a couple of other things that I told you I wanted to talk about, but we'll see. Hands up if you have a question, and we'll have some mic runners come by, and let's start right here next to Adam, because it's easy to hand the mic over. Or no, he already gave up the mic. Thank you. Please introduce yourself and share with us where you're from.
Okay, sure. My name is Pat Edward. I'm here representing Trades for a Difference, which is a program that works with young people in communities in Philadelphia, helping them get into the upper echelon of the trades. Often when you're in black and brown communities, the first thing they do is tell you go into labor or deconstruction and things of that nature. But demolition. But nobody knows about the intellectual side of trades, right? Construction management, project management, electrician. So that's kind of stuff that we do. And then we have an entrepreneurship arm and things of that nature. So my question, because you guys are so candid, and I really appreciate that. So something that's been kind of sitting on me for a while is you can't have a tomorrow if you keep killing today. So the divide between baby boomers and everybody else, Let's just call it what it is, right? How do you guys deal with that?
There's a report one of our grantees does called Kid Share that is by a group called First Focus, which even explores the amount of our federal dollars that are spent on older Americans versus younger Americans, and it's shameful, I think, the ways that we allocate particularly our federal dollars across generations. So you are absolutely correct that there is a today that we are hindering because we're so focused on supporting yesterday, actually. And so I think part of our policy work is always about how do we drive more investment into young people, because they are a part of generating a powerful tomorrow for our country, but we're not going to get there if we don't invest more today. So both at the federal level and the state level, the way we think about it is often how do we drive public investment toward young people, and every day you're trying to provide additional strategies that could be invested in, but more importantly, to make the case. I mean, public will is a powerful thing. If you could just make the case for why folks need to invest in young people, and it's for just that reason that you got a lot of boomers who are going to be depending on these workers of tomorrow, and if we aren't investing in them, they're not going to be prepared. So I join you in that. I'm using my voice for that, for that purpose too. But I think policy is the place to start. At least that's where we've started.
That's terrific. Thank you. Other show of hands. So we'll come over here and then over there. So, gentlemen, thank you. Yeah.
Appreciate it. How you doing? My name is Dionysus August. I represent Newark, New Jersey by way of Harlem. I represent a fair amount of organizations today, to be quite honest, including myself. But Lisa, a big thing that I want to give you appreciation for is you speaking about authenticity in these kind of areas. A lot of times, myself, I come into spaces and I have to constantly remind people that no work can be done if you're not yourself, and no one takes you seriously if you're not serious about yourself. Especially being a young man coming from the areas I come from, dealing with the diasporas that I deal with, you can't expect some of us to come in a suit and tie when we've only known joggers and sweatshirts, you know? So I would ask of you to further expound on the fact that why authenticity is one of the top 3 things for any company or organization to be successful, because a lot of companies undermine why authenticity or their real selves are important to any work that they do.
Yeah. Well, you heard me say I started my career with me and 11 white men. There was a very different Lisa that had to show up in those spaces to be successful, and even in corporate America. You know, a simple thing is I have curly hair. There are people who work at UPS who have no idea that I have naturally curly hair because I didn't feel like I could be that part of myself. Something as simple as how my hair grows felt like it wasn't a part of what I could bring to corporate America every day. And it was, you know, the perspective I brought, the people I cared about, the issues I thought needed to be addressed that led me to change careers because I wanted to be myself. I wanted to be a curly-headed woman of color from Georgia. And it was not until I came to Casey that I feel like I was able to be all of myself. And the way that I see my leadership respected and accepted feels very different than it did when I was a leader in other spaces. I've been a leader a long time, but there is something about me revealing who I am and what I care about that, to your point, enables others to do the same, to say what they care about, and to risk boldly, you know, trying things in a different way. That I think is just fundamentally important. I admit I've been on an authenticity journey. I think a lot of people are. So I'm telling you, I didn't start this way. This is, 20 plus years into my journey. But I find you have more power, more confidence, and a deeper ability to relate to people when you're just yourself. because I think that's what other people want to bring to the table. And if they see you bringing it, to your point, I think there's so much more willing to bring themselves to the table. So thank you for respecting that about me. It's a long, fought journey to be myself.
Well, and take it from someone who knows you've got great hair. Sorry, I had a moment of envy up here. So let's go over to the next mic. Somewhere over here, somebody had a question. Thank you. Please.
And to wear colors. I don't wear black anymore. Buy black. I'm colors. So yeah, it's part of being me. I'm a girl who likes colors.
Cheryl Davis from the San Francisco Human Rights Commission. Really appreciated what you were talking about with JDAI. And I guess my question is, we right now have, the mayor has introduced a blue ribbon panel to look at juvenile detention and juvenile justice reform. The supervisors have introduced legislation to shut down juvenile hall. How do you do this work, especially as a foundation, and not have it be political, right? That you
Who
keep.
said it's not?
So talk about that. I think part of this process is like, how do you not lose focus on the young people and not get caught up in choosing a side, which then could ultimately derail the work?
Yeah. We employ something that actually helped to bring together. So Casey had a very big policy unit, which I led, and we also had a system reform team, which I did not lead. But both were investing in system reform in different ways. And when I came, I thought, why don't we bring these strategies together into an inside-outside game? Why do we assume in a place we just have to have an inside game or just have to have an outside game? I think they need to complement one another. So the way I might think about the overcoming the politics is that we choose to simultaneously support system leaders and the things they've got to do inside of a system in order to make it function better. But we also support advocates and community leaders who have to hold that very system accountable and to share with that system what they think it ought to look like. So I don't think they are disconnected strategies. I think they're actually very important strategies, because you won't have a functioning system if you don't have people inside the system who are trying to affect change, and you don't have strong leaders outside the system who are bringing community voice and accountability to the conversation. Trying to help bridge conversation, authentic conversation between those two in order to overcome the differences of perspective that we've had. And we actually find that because we are that neutral broker, because we care about both, it enables us to convene conversations in ways that we might not be able to do it if we weren't partnering with both sides of that equation. So I think that helps you focus on sort of a common result of what people inside and outside the system want to see happen, rather than getting bogged down in some of the politics, as you might describe it, that could derail the process.
Great, that's great. Okay, let's go right here. And show of hands so I know who's in the queue. Okay, we'll come to you next, sir.
Good afternoon, Kevin Stump with Jobs First from New York. It's really refreshing to kind of sit here and listen and be a part of this conversation from a national foundation leader, looking forward to what's next. So much of philanthropy, sometimes the conversation feels like they're talking as if they're outside of the system that we're all a part of and trying to transform in many ways. So I would be interested in your perspective and your vision of what the future of collaboration between philanthropy could look like, so that there aren't barriers to serve, right? Barriers to help connect. That in many ways some of the pieces of philanthropy kind of perpetuate. So curious your thinking there.
Thank you. That was one of the questions I didn't get to, so.
I think I would probably say the theme I'm reflecting on most is joining. And that's not something philanthropy is known for. I have had the pleasure of working with or in nearly every sector that's represented here. I worked in corporate America. I work in philanthropy. I obviously partner with nonprofits all over the country. And so I have a deeper appreciation for what different players can bring to the table. And sort of partnership and joining is something that's just sort of instinctual to me. So I think a lot about joining. How can I help our institution be a part of glue that helps join things together, rather than philanthropy always imagining it has to start or create or invent. There's lots of good things out in the world, and we have the luxury of a role that lets us connect and be glue. And so I would like to take advantage of that. I don't have a view that we have to be in charge, or we have to have the best idea. That there's something really important about being glue and helping to facilitate glue. That joining theme, I think, also applies to community. That's often the missing element of what we're trying to do. We've got nonprofits and the public sector and philanthropy can do a good job of talking to one another to the exclusion of the communities that we're seeking to serve. So I also think a lot about how can I reimagine our work and our institutions in a way that enables us to join better with communities. I really am, I think cross-sector collaboration is sort of the answer. I often talk about Rubik's Cubes, that we're often trying to solve things as if, hey, if we could just line up the yellows, it's all gonna be fine. And philanthropy is maybe the yellows, nothing's gonna be better. The Rubik's Cube is not solved because the yellows are all lined up. We've gotta, we gotta get all the sectors lined up, all the sides of that Rubik's Cube. And so I don't think it's sort of a nice to do. I really do feel like if all the sectors aren't working together and rowing in the same direction, we're not going to get there. So I think a lot about joining. Maybe a more humble approach to philanthropy that respects what other people have to bring, that respects what community has to bring, and respects what other sectors have to bring. So glue.
Wow, that's unique in a time where philanthropy seems to be trending towards from charity to philanthropy to strategic philanthropy to hyper strategic philanthropy. It is nice to hear a leader say, how can we join? And so thank you for that. And we, this group will probably hold you accountable for that.
I'm sure they will.
And it's it's really it is a very refreshing perspective. So we want to invite you to have more conversations with funders. So yeah. Well, beyond, you have to tell the yellow to help fix the green in the other parts of the cube. Okay, I apologize. That's over here. I think it should be on.
I'm sorry. How's everyone doing? Good afternoon. Ms. Lisa, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's kind of funny because I went to school in college to become a corporate attorney one day. And then during my sophomore year, a racial incident happened, and it changed my whole life to actually not going to law school after graduating college, and actually started my nonprofit to help young men across the city of Philadelphia. So welcome everybody to Philadelphia. So now I'm like doing a lot of work now, like how to change communities driven by young people. But the biggest thing, my question is, I know there's so much money for Opportunity Youth, millions and millions of dollars is great, but it's like the money is for Opportunity Youth, but it's like who's giving money to Opportunity Youth directly? And I don't mean to say, hey, Opportunity Youth, here's some money. It's more like entrepreneurship, and that mind, especially social entrepreneurship. And I know that there's so many ideas and brilliant ideas coming from Opportunity Youth, but they're not getting money or resources to do that. And then I do a lot of work. I've been in a number of fellowships like Echo and Green, I'm Echo Green Fellow, and a few others I don't even mention right now. But in the space that I'm in, I don't see Opportunity Youth or more people who look like me in that space. And it's a lot of times it's like, well, what does the equity look like in helping Opportunity Youth grow out their own entities, rather than having people just come in and say, oh, you're an entrepreneur, we want to train you, but not gonna give any money. So like, what does that look like to actually invest in them directly, rather than giving organizations the money to do stuff?
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful question. Part of the listening that we've been doing with young people to understand what they want, entrepreneurship was one of the most powerful themes we heard young people talking about. They want to run things, they want to lead things, they're creative. And it was some mind shift for us. Like a lot of people who might be in this room, we thought a lot about, high growth sectors and how we were going to position young people for these pathways in institutions. And a lot of young people reject that sort of institutional pathway of employment and really want to be entrepreneurs. And that was exciting to hear. And I'll admit that we're sort of in the beginnings of our journey around youth entrepreneurship. We have invested with, a number of organizations that are doing a lot of what you're saying, sort of the technical assistance or, helping prepare young people for that work, but haven't sort of figured out how to invest in them directly. Part of what might be a strategy around that is partnering with community financial development institutions, CDFIs, to help them think about how they're investing in youth entrepreneurship, not just adult entrepreneurship, because we do a lot of work with them around community development. We aren't, as a foundation, we aren't sort of direct investors in enterprises in that way, so our role is typically around supporting the technical assistance providers or other sort of pipelines for young people into entrepreneurship. But you give me food for thought to think about how there are other ways we can make sure young people have the capital that they need in order to, we'll talk about that? Okay, great.
Yeah, that's
But I will say that's been one of the most exciting things I've gotten out of our listening sessions with young people is their enthusiasm for entrepreneurship. And we've also started thinking about how this growing gig economy can provide, while it's not a perfect pathway for young people, it can create skill building opportunities that could support their future in both traditional employment pathways, but also entrepreneurial strategies. So we're thinking about it. I see a woman over here waving. I hope somebody gives her a mic.
All right, no, that's your prerogative. You get
Give this lady a mic over.
All right, who's waving? Which one do you want? That right there? Okay, great. Thanks. And I'm sorry, why don't we do a quick question from you, hand the mic to somebody else, and we'll do 3 more questions at once, and then Lisa will have the chance to pick the easiest one to answer. And then she'll be able to aggregate them, and we've already heard she can answer them. So these will be the last 3 questions. I apologize. I hope you can stick around for a little while afterwards.
We'll get Amtrak to slow down.
We know that you're not in charge of that, so I hope Aaron will let you stick around for a little while. So go ahead, please.
Okay. My name is Gloria, and I'm with San Francisco Roadmap to Peace. And I just wanted to take it back to when you shared your story at the beginning around doing something that feeds your soul, and nobody really telling you that, and having to figure that out through your own journey. And so I was thinking about this and talking about it with some colleagues early before this. Just around, in our work, we work with young people that have been impacted by violence, community violence, and a lot of what we do, everything that we do is healing centered and focused around their healing process. And so really thinking about the employment too, and, helping them find a job and, and be able to sustain themselves, and many times starting to break that cycle of poverty, but also helping them find something that feeds their soul, something that they love to do, something that, and so just kind of thinking through being intentional about that this is part of their healing. This is part of what's gonna make them find happiness and thrive. And just kind of some thoughts about, how to be able to do that, whether that's mentoring, career coaching, supporting more entrepreneurship, gig economy, things that really can bring young people into discovering their pathway to happiness.
Okay, so hold that. Next question here. I know you're ready to go. Thanks.
I should write them down so that I don't forget what my options are.
Doug Wood, thank you.
Oh, okay, great. This has been terrific. Thank you both. So in my old life, I was proud to fund 2 books out of several, but in particular, Michelle Marsh's book, Push Out, The Criminalization of Black Girls in America's Schools, and Susan Burton's book, Becoming Miss Burton. We talk about girls of color and African-American women and women of color,
but we're not necessarily intentional about it. So could you tell us a little bit about how you're thinking about Casey's work specific to girls of color and women of color?
Great. And the third and final question, maybe we don't have one. Is there a hand? Where is it? Over there. Sorry. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lisa. This is awesome. My name is Franco from Los Angeles, California. I run the Right Way Foundation. We focus on foster youth. Great job. We're shutting down camps in LA, so they're listening to you guys. But I have 400 foster youth that are saying to me now, and they're 18 to 25, saying, why did they take me out of my home? And it caused more abuse in the foster care system. So is the Casey Foundation supporting or have a program that's helping us fix the souls of our foster youth that was destroyed from the foster care system? Because we have to fix those, because the statistics show when they have babies, they're going to go into the foster care system. And we're pushing family first, again, asking for another waiver. So that's my question to you. Thank you.
Okay, so final question is healing-centered, soul-feeding, women and girls of color, foster care, keeping families together.
Yes? Can I just say yes?
Okay, you can.
I'll say a word more than yes. I think I'll give a couple sentence answers to each of them. The way I think you help young people find their passion is to expose them to everything you possibly can that's good in the world, and to have the adults around them share their journey and the things they care about. And if I'd had the opportunity to talk to social workers or nonprofit leaders or philanthropy leaders, I might have found my passion earlier. But giving young people the chance to even know something exists. I thought all I could be was a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer. I suck at math, and so I'm a lawyer. And I didn't know what my options were. And I think letting young people know the universe of options that are out there, I think can help them find their passion. Girls of color, I agree with you, an extraordinarily important issue. We funded some research about the adultification of girls of color just last year, I think it was. And so we know that is an extremely important issue. What I can say is that we don't have work that is specifically focused on girls of color, but in the work that we do, whether it's child welfare or juvenile justice, we disaggregate the data and figure out where there are specific pockets or issues that we need to work on. I certainly know in our juvenile justice work, we think a lot about how we can tailor solutions that are helpful to girls of color, and we need separate solutions that are tailored to young men of color. So I agree with you on that. We don't have a specific initiative around that, but it plays out as we disaggregate our data in various program areas, what we might need to do to tailor that work. The souls of young people in foster care, oh my God, that's like the hardest question ever. How do we repair the damage that has been done to these young people? I think giving them a chance to lead the change that they want to see in the world is maybe the best answer I can give you about how Casey thinks about that. How do they turn their painful stories into progress for other young people? We find is often a part of the healing process for them. It enables them to make sense of what they experience, but also to try to make the system make more sense in the future. So I can't say we have particular practices or strategies that we utilize in that work, but I do think giving young people a voice so that they can express what that has felt like and try to contribute to something being different for those that follow them seems to be important work that they enjoy being a part of. But I would love to know more about ways that we can help young people heal from so many of the harmful things that we do. And then what was your question, Steve? I don't know what your question was.
No, that
was it? We're done?
You hit them all.
It's a wrap.
I get to close us while Monique comes up to close the actual convening. I'll close this conversation. See Israel over there. We share a common love for Kendrick Lamar, but this time I'm going to quote. We talked about when we Google you, you're neck and neck for first on Google with a poker player. There's a great singer-songwriter, the Texas Tables here, Gary Clark Jr. from Texas, who has a great song about "You're Gonna Know My Name by the End of the Night." a leader like you, we're going to know your name. You're going to be way up there on Google by the end of this tenure, and your leadership is deeply appreciated. So let's give her a round of applause. Thank you, Lisa.
Can I say this? Can I have my mic back? Last word. I don't want you to know my name. I want you to know our work.
Good.
And so
that's
not
even
about
better.
me. It's about the work.
Even better.
And she actually perfectly teed up exactly how I wanted to close us out, because what I wanted to do, part of my role is very much focused on how we connect these themes. Our plenaries are always about what are the biggest ideas that as an entire network we should come together to critically focus on. So to just try to make some connections, of course, all of the plenary conversations at their core have been very much about systems change, right? We have been talking about supporting young people, and across the plenaries we talked about not just supporting young people, supporting children, but we have heard from the Justice Plenary, then we heard again this morning on building a talent pipeline plenary, and then again this afternoon, how in order to do this systems change work, in order to really support children, you must address poverty. And in order to address poverty, that means that you have a through line, a laser focus on this systems piece. And as a leader within a system, you must be willing to deploy your resources differently to achieve outcomes. At the same time, we continue to have conversations in these plenaries around collaboration. And, of course, working both inside and outside of the system, thinking critically about the role of partners. But I think what is unique about the conversations we continue to hear is this emphasis on harnessing and respecting the power of community, and hearing so many different leaders, and including Lisa especially, talk about respecting the power of families and communities, and wanting to be in partnership with families and with young people themselves, the youth and adult partnerships that are so critical to working toward the outcomes that we see. We have heard so many leaders here, and especially Lisa, talk about our young people as assets. There's just this shared language and frame around how much we value our young children in this work. For those of you who are familiar with James Baldwin, you have likely heard his quote about these all are our children. We are either going to profit from or pay for what they become. And there's this consistent theme around the fact that we not only have the responsibility to invest in them, but we recognize how much better we're all going to do as a result of these investments. So I want to make sure that that connection is clear. But then there's this other thing that we haven't really talked about, but it has been a through line in all of these conversations, and it's about our values. So if I may, Lisa, one of the things I most deeply appreciated in everything that you shared here this afternoon, in my mind, how I heard this is about how do you show up as an effective leader who is committed to outcomes, committed to legacy, committed to community, committed to harnessing power, but does it with humility. Holds humility, so that these things are not mutually exclusive, right? Like, we can be effective leaders, but we can actually live in humility so that we see people and we're building relationships with deep respect for where people are. And we heard some of that, like, Kevin Bethel, I thought, brought that approach, Sheila earlier today, but I really want to call out, because when we think about the future of this work, how do we actually support systemic collaboration that gets to this long-term outcomes we seek? Just calling out the role and the value that humility plays in being able to build and sustain these relationships. And then the last thing that I want to say is that I especially loved, because, we were supposed to have Bill Bynum be a part of this conversation. We have been so earnestly trying to make sure that we lift up the rural work in our communities. We're so committed to our rural partnerships. We recently expanded our network to have St. Augustine and Jasper in Texas join our network. And so I just want to especially acknowledge and appreciate you lifting up this rural piece and reminding us the responsibility we have to recognize that capacity looks different in rural places, and even more importantly, how purposeful that is, right? So as we're entering into partnerships with our rural communities, and I would also say with our tribal communities, making sure we hold a lens that honors and respects where they are because of all of the purposeful ways these communities are in place, and making sure that I want to just echo you. As we are investing in those places, we are adapting our strategies to meet them where they are. So that's my way of just really recognizing all of the wisdom you just shared with our network, trying to connect it back to the plenaries and conversations we've been having to date. And I will join Steve in saying we're so excited to watch the future of your leadership and the impact you're going to have. Thank you for being here with us.
So, in conclusion, we are adjourned, but before we adjourn, let's just thank Monique Miles for her leadership. All right, now we're adjourned, and now all the after meetings begin. So let's head to a bunch of breakout rooms and not enjoy this sunny day. Thanks, everybody. Great session.